Hello there. Have you ever made a decision thinking it would make you happy, only to later realize it didn't? Or dreaded something you thought would be unbearable, only to find it wasn't that bad? What if I told you that our brains erwareto mispredict what will bring us happiness? That's the central idea of Stumbling on Happiness, a groundbreaking book by Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert. With wit, science, and real-life stories, he reveals why our imagination often tricks us about the future, why we misjudge what will bring joy or sorrow, and how understanding these blind spots can help us make better choices. By the end of this book, you'll learn why we overestimate the pain of failures, why big wins don't thrill as long as we think, and most importantly, how to stumble more reliably into a happier life. If you enjoy deep insights from great books that can transform your life, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and stay tuned, because what you're about to discover might just change how you live your life. Chapter 1: Journey to Elsewhen. The first chapter opens with the bold idea that what truly sets humans apart is our unique ability to think about the future. Other animals act on instinct. Squirrels bury nuts, chimps use tools, but they don't consciously imagine tomorrow. Humans, powered by the frontal lobe, can project themselves into futures that don't yet exist, planning, worrying, and hoping. This ability is so central that those with frontal lobe damage live in a permanent present, unable to picture later. Our frontal lobes are, in essence, time machines that free us from the now. Imagining the future serves multiple roles. It gives us pleasure, as anticipation often feels sweeter than the event itself. It also helps us prepare for danger. Forecasting failures and risks motivates us to act cautiously. On average, a notable portion of our thoughts each day is about what's next, making us part-time residents of tomorrow. Even more deeply, perspection ties to our need for control. People are happier and healthier when they can make choices, even small ones. Experiments in nursing homes show that control, even the illusion of it, improves well-being, while losing it can be devastating. We chase control not only for outcomes but because steering life itself brings satisfaction. But here lies the paradox. We plan and imagine because we think it will guide us to happiness. Yet, as the author hints, our foresight is flawed. Just as our eyes are tricked by optical illusions, our minds are often misled about what will truly make us happy. The rest of the book unpacks this puzzle. Action points. Notice your forecasts. Are you daydreaming in ways that inspire, or worrying in ways that drain? Reframe negative forecasts into preparation. Strengthen small choices. Exercise control in daily routines. It builds resilience and happiness. Savor anticipation. Don't always rush. Sometimes the joy lies in looking forward, not just arriving. Chapter 2: The View from In Here. This chapter dives into a central puzzle. If happiness is what we all seek, why do we so often misunderstand it in ourselves and others? The case of Lori and Reba Chappell, conjoined twins who report living joyful, fulfilled lives, illustrates this. Outsiders assume their situation must be miserable, but the twins themselves insist they wouldn't change it. This clash reveals an important truth. Happiness is subjective, felt from the inside, invisible from the outside. The word happiness itself carries different meanings. Sometimes it refers to emotional happiness, which is the raw feeling of joy or satisfaction. Sometimes moral happiness, which is living in a way we believe is virtuous. And sometimes judgmental happiness, which is evaluating one's life as good overall. Emotional happiness is hardest to pin down. It's like trying to describe the color yellow to someone who has never seen. You can point to objects or compare it to other feelings, but the inner sensation remains private and irreducible. Here lies the scientific problem. How can happiness be measured if it is subjective and internal? Psychologists can't observe feelings directly, so they rely on self-reports, facial expressions, and behaviors. But these methods are imperfect. People may miscommunicate, exaggerate, or fail to predict how they'll feel later. As a result, society often misjudges happiness, as in the case of assuming conjoined twins must be miserable. The lesson is clear. What counts as happiness cannot be universally imposed. It must be reported and experienced personally. Action points. Respect happiness as personal. Avoid judging others' well-being by external standards. What looks undesirable from outside may still feel deeply fulfilling inside. Define your own lens. Are you chasing emotional highs, moral meaning, or life satisfaction? Clarifying this helps you make better choices aligned with your values. Be cautious of assumptions in science and life. Self-reports, not outside guesses, remain the closest measure of happiness, even though they are imperfect. Chapter 3: Outside Looking In. This chapter builds on the challenge of measuring happiness by highlighting the gap between our inner experience and what others can observe. The central idea is that happiness is private, yet science depends on public, observable data. This creates a paradox. We can never directly access another person's feelings, yet we still try to study them systematically. To bridge this gap, scientists rely on proxies, what people say, how they behave, or what their bodies reveal, like brain scans or facial expressions. But none of these tools fully capture subjective experience. For instance, self-reports can be biased. People may exaggerate, understate, or even misremember their feelings. Language itself is a barrier. Words like joy, contentment, or satisfaction are approximations, not precise measures of the feeling itself. What's more, we are notoriously bad at predicting our future feelings, which means even our own forecasts of happiness can't always be trusted. Another challenge is comparison. When someone says they are happy, does it mean the same as when someone else uses the word? If one person rates their happiness as 8 out of 10 and another also says 8 out of 10, are they feeling equally good? Probably not. Happiness has no universal scale. It is colored by personal histories, cultural values, and expectations. As the chapter stresses, we see the world from in here. But when we try to compare, we must step outside looking in, which distorts reality. The big takeaway is that while happiness is central to human life, it resists objective measurement. Science can collect useful clues, but at the end of the day, happiness remains subjective, context-dependent, and hard to standardize. This sets up the next sections of the book, where the focus shifts from what happiness is to why our attempts to imagine future happiness are often misleading. Action points. Beware of surface judgments. Don't assume you can gauge someone else's happiness by looking at their life from the outside. Their reality is always richer and more personal than it appears. Use self-checks wisely. Track your moods and feelings over time, but remember they are subjective snapshots, not objective truths. Avoid overcomparison. Your 7 out of 10 happiness may not match another person's 7 out of 10. Focus on personal growth rather than universal benchmarks. Chapter 4. In the blind spot of the mind's eye. This chapter shifts focus to the limits of imagination, how the mind constructs images of the future and why those mental simulations are often misleading. Just as our eyes have a blind spot where the optic nerve blocks vision, our imagination has blind spots that distort how we foresee events. The problem is not that we lack imagination, but that imagination fills in gaps so seamlessly that we rarely notice what's missing. When we imagine the future, our minds use fragments of memory and current experience to build quick mental pictures. This process is automatic and efficient, but it often leaves out crucial details. For example, people imagining a future vacation focus on sunny beaches and cocktails, but forget the airport delays, the sunburns, or the credit card bill afterward. Similarly, imagining winning the lottery conjures images of joy and luxury, but rarely the stress of managing sudden wealth or the envy it sparks in others. Our mind's eye paints futures that are partial, biased, and overly tidy. The danger is that wet rust these flawed simulations as if they were accurate previews. We rarely stop to question what's missing from our imagined future, and so we make choices based on incomplete pictures. This explains why people often feel disappointed after finally achieving what they long imagined would make them happy, or why setbacks they dread don't hurt as much as expected. The mind exaggerates, simplifies, and overlooks details in ways that systematically misguide our decisions. The chapter's central insight is sobering. Our imagination is not a crystal ball but a sketch artist, fast, suggestive, and often inaccurate. Recognizing this blind spot is essential if we want to avoid overvaluing certain futures or fearing others unnecessarily. Action points. Question your mental movies. When you picture a future event, ask, what am I leaving out? This reduces overconfidence in your forecasts. Ground imagination in reality. Talk to people who've had the experience you're considering, a new job, city, or lifestyle. Their realities often expose the blind spots in your vision. Expect surprise. Acknowledge that life will always include unanticipated details, both good and bad, that imagination cannot capture. Chapter 5. The Hound of Silence. This chapter explores another flaw in our imagination. Not just what it adds inaccurately, but what it leaves out altogether. When we picture the future, our minds often fail to notice the absence of key details. This absence is powerful, yet we are usually blind to it, like a watchdog that doesn't bark. Hence the chapter's title, The Hound of Silence. When people imagine the future, they tend to focus on what will change and ignore what will stay the same. For example, someone offered a job in another city pictures the new office, new apartment, and new colleagues, but forgets that they will still enjoy coffee in the morning, still argue with traffic, and still have to pay bills. This leads to a bias. We overestimate the impact of change because we neglect all the continuity that cushions our lives. As a result, both joys and sorrows appear more extreme in our imagination than they actually are when experienced. Another silence comes from failing to consider how quickly we adapt. People often assume that big gains, like winning the lottery, will bring lasting happiness and that big losses, like losing a job, will bring endless misery. In reality, humans are resilient. We adapt to new circumstances more quickly than we predict. The hound of silence here is our failure to account for this natural recovery, which makes both highs and lows less permanent than we imagine. The chapter's lesson is that imagination is a selective storyteller. By ignoring the silent but steady background of daily life, it exaggerates the impact of change. Recognizing what our minds leave out can protect us from overreacting to imagined futures and help us make wiser decisions in the present. Action points. Factor in continuity. When imagining a big change, list not only what will be different but also what will remain the same. This brings balance to your expectations. Trust your adaptability. Remind yourself that setbacks won't hurt as long as you think, and windfalls won't thrill as long as you hope. Humans bounce back faster than imagination predicts. Beware of extremes. Decisions made in the heat of anticipated joy or fear often overestimate the future's impact. Step back before committing. Chapter 6. The future is now. This chapter explains how our present emotions shape the way we imagine the future. When we try to predict how something will feel later, our current mood sneaks in and colors the picture, often without us noticing. This is known as presentism. For example, when hungry, people overestimate how much food they'll want tomorrow. When feeling lonely, they assume they'll feel lonely much longer than they actually will. Our present state acts like a filter through which we imagine future states. The problem is that we fail to correct for this influence. We believe we're forecasting objectively, but really we're just projecting today forward. Another insight is that we confuse the present simulation with the future reality. Imagining eating a delicious meal while hungry feels almost as good as eating, which makes us think the real event will bring the same level of satisfaction. But once hunger fades, the imagined joy often disappears. Our minds mistake how it feels to imagine with how it will feel to experience. This leads to systematic errors. We buy groceries we don't end up eating, sign up for commitments we later regret, or fear problems that won't feel as bad when they happen. The chapter emphasizes that the future we see is often just a mirror of the present. Action points. Check your state. Before making predictions, notice your mood. Ask, am I hungry, tired, stressed, or overly excited? These states distort foresight. Delay decisions. Don't decide big things in a strong emotional state. Wait until your mood stabilizes for a clearer view. Test with distance. Imagine making the decision for future you a year from now. This reduces the pull of the present. Chapter 7. Time bombs. This chapter explores how time changes our perspective on events, often in ways we fail to anticipate. The central idea is that we tend to imagine the future in snapshots, but in reality, feelings evolve with time. What feels overwhelming in the short term often fades in the long term. For example, we expect heartbreak or failure to feel devastating forever, but a year later, most people report far less pain than predicted. Conversely, joys such as promotions or new purchases lose their thrill more quickly than imagined. This error stems from a focus on the immediate emotional impact, while neglecting the fact that time naturally softens extremes. The chapter also discusses how context shifts over time. Something that feels important now, like the outcome of a sports game or an embarrassing mistake, may shrink in significance once life moves on. But when imagining the future, we forget that new concerns, new routines, and new goals will eventually replace the old ones. Time quietly changes the frame, making our foresight unreliable. The lesson: our predictions often exaggerate both the duration and intensity of feelings. We overestimate how long misery will linger and how long delight will last. Recognizing this time bomb of shifting perspective helps us make steadier decisions. Action points: add the long view. When predicting happiness, ask how you'll feel not tomorrow, but 6 months or a year from now. Discount intensity. Assume negative feelings won't last as long as you fear, and positive feelings won't sustain the high you expect. Context check. Remember that today's big deal often becomes tomorrow's small memory. Chapter 8. Paradise Glossed. This chapter explains another bias in imagination. We idealize the future by focusing on the highlights while ignoring the mundane realities. This is known as impact bias. We expect future events to bring bigger and longer-lasting emotional changes than they actually do. When imagining a vacation, we picture sunsets and laughter, not delayed flights or long waits in line. When imagining a new relationship, we focus on passion, not laundry and bills. Our minds highlight the extraordinary and leave out the ordinary, which makes futures look more attractive or more dreadful than they really are. The problem is compounded by focalism, the tendency to focus too much on one event and ignore everything else that will also shape our happiness. Winning the lottery may feel like it will define life forever, but in reality, health, relationships, and daily routines still matter more in the long run. Similarly, losing a job feels catastrophic in imagination, but other life aspects, family, hobbies, community, continue to provide balance. The takeaway: imagination paints futures in glossy colors, but the truth is that life always includes ordinary moments, no matter how extraordinary the event. Action points: balance the picture. When imagining a future event, deliberately consider the ordinary routines that will still surround it. Beware of focalism. Don't let one event dominate your forecast of happiness. Other parts of life will continue to matter. Plan beyond the peak. Ask what daily life will look like after the initial thrill or shock wears off. Chapter 9. Immune to reality. This chapter explores one of the most fascinating discoveries in psychology. Humans have a psychological immune system. Just as our biological immune system protects us from disease, this mental system protects us from despair. When bad things happen, our minds unconsciously generate rationalizations, reframe events, and help us recover emotionally. For example, people who lose elections, jobs, or even physical abilities often bounce back emotionally faster than outsiders predict. They find silver linings, reinterpret the meaning of their losses, and adjust to new circumstances. This explains why paraplegics often report higher happiness than expected, or why rejected lovers eventually insist the breakup was for the best. Our minds automatically spin narratives that protect us from prolonged misery. However, the catch is that we don't anticipate this resilience. When imagining the future, we fail to factor in the power of our psychological immune system. We expect negative events to crush us longer than they do. Similarly, we assume positive events will bring endless joy, forgetting that adaptation will soon dull the highs. This leads to poor decision-making, avoiding risks we could recover from or chasing goals that won't satisfy as long as we imagine. Interestingly, the immune system works best when events are irreversible. When we cannot change a situation, the mind works harder to rationalize it. For example, people locked into a job or marriage often find unexpected satisfaction by reframing their circumstances. By contrast, when an option remains reversible, dissatisfaction lingers because the mind withholds its strongest defenses, always wondering if a better choice was possible. The lesson is profound. We are more resilient than we predict, and constraints often protect happiness by forcing our psychological immune system to engage. Action points. Trust resilience. Don't overestimate how long bad events will hurt. You'll likely adapt faster than you imagine. Value irreversibility. Commit fully when possible. Knowing a choice is final triggers your psychological immune system to find satisfaction. Reframe consciously. When setbacks happen, ask, what's the hidden gift or lesson? Your mind naturally looks for these. Help it along. Chapter 10. Once bitten. This chapter explains why our imagination about the future is flawed not only because of blind spots, presentism, or idealization, but also because we rely too heavily on memory of the past. Unfortunately, memory itself is an unreliable guide. When we recall past experiences, we don't replay them like movies, we reconstruct them. Memory highlights certain details, especially emotional peaks and endings, while ignoring the rest. Psychologists call this the peak or end rule. Our memory of an experience is shaped more by its most intense moment and its ending than by the full duration. For example, a long vacation with one stressful final day may be remembered more negatively than a shorter, smoother trip, even if the former contained more joy overall. The problem is that we use these biased memories as templates for predicting the future. If a past event was remembered as painful, we assume similar events will be painful, even if the memory was distorted. Similarly, we may chase experiences that were remembered as joyful, even if the joy was only in a fleeting moment. In short, memory misleads imagination. Another issue is that memory is colored by the present. If we feel unhappy now, we tend to recall past experiences as worse than they were, reinforcing our current mood. If we feel good now, our memories may seem rosier than reality. Thus, both memory and imagination are constantly shaped by the present, stacking one bias upon another. The chapter emphasizes that imagination uses memory as raw material, but since memory is faulty, our imagined futures inherit these distortions. This makes us repeat mistakes, overvalue certain outcomes, and undervalue others. Action points. Question your memories. Before relying on a past experience to predict a future one, ask, am I remembering the whole event or just its most intense parts? Avoid repetition traps. Don't assume something will feel the same as last time. Both you and the context have changed. Journal experiences. Recording events more objectively in the moment can counteract memory distortions later. Chapter 11. Reporting live from tomorrow. This chapter introduces a surprising solution to the problem of flawed imagination, using other people's experiences as guides. While our imagination and memory are biased, the experiences of others often provide more accurate data about how we ourselves are likely to feel. Research shows that people usually end up reacting to situations in similar ways. For example, most individuals who win the lottery return to baseline happiness after a short period, and most paraplegics recover more emotional stability than outsiders predict. This suggests that rather than imagining how we'll feel, we could simply ask, how do people like me feel in this situation? Their answers are often better predictors of our future happiness than our own forecasts. However, many resist this idea. We like to believe we are unique individuals, whose emotional responses will differ from others. This illusion of uniqueness leads us to ignore valuable data. In reality, while personalities differ, human emotional patterns are remarkably consistent. By rejecting other people's reports, we handicap our decision-making. Another resistance is cultural. Modern societies prize independence and self-reliance. Depending on others' experiences feels like giving up autonomy. Yet, the science is clear. The best predictor of your future happiness is not your imagination, but someone else's present report. Action points. Use surrogates. Before making major life decisions, job changes, relocations, purchases, seek out people who've done it. Their experiences are strong predictors of how you'll feel. Challenge uniqueness bias. Remind yourself that your emotions will likely follow human patterns, not stand apart from them. Treat others as mirrors. Look to real-life examples rather than imagined scenarios when forecasting your happiness. Chapter 12, The Least Worst Method. The book concludes by circling back to the central theme. Our imagination, though flawed, is still essential. It is the very tool that allows us to plan, dream, and shape our lives. But since it is prone to systematic errors, blind spots, presentism, focalism, memory distortions, we need a strategy to use it wisely. The least worst method is to combine imagination with other tools. Look outward by consulting other people's experiences. Look inward with humility, be questioning your memories and recognizing your biases. Accept uncertainty, be realizing that even with better tools, the future will always surprise us. This chapter emphasizes that happiness cannot be perfectly engineered. Our psychological immune system, memory quirks, and resilience ensure that life's outcomes rarely feel exactly as predicted. But this is not a failure. It's part of what makes us human. If we accept that foresight is imperfect, we can make decisions with less anxiety and more flexibility. Ultimately, the book's lesson is paradoxical. Our minds cannot perfectly stumble upon happiness, but the act of stumbling is what keeps us moving forward. By combining imagination with humility and social knowledge, we can get close enough to steer our lives meaningfully. Action points. Adopt the least worst method. Don't rely on imagination alone. Blend it with real-world evidence from others and a clear-eyed view of your biases. Embrace uncertainty. Stop expecting perfect foresight. Accept that life will surprise you, and prepare to adapt rather than control everything. Value the journey. Happiness isn't in flawless prediction. It's in engaging with life, making choices, and allowing resilience to do its work. Final takeaways. So, what does stumbling on happiness really teach us? That while our minds are brilliant at imagining the future, they're also full of blind spots. We overestimate how long pain will last. We overrate how much joy big wins will bring. And we often forget that everyday routines shape more of our happiness than life's dramatic moments. But here's the good news. We are far more resilient than we think, and by learning from others' experiences, questioning our own assumptions, and embracing life's surprises, we can stumble into happiness more often than not. If you found these insights valuable, don't let them stop here. Put them into practice. And if you'd like to keep discovering more life-changing ideas like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out. Remember, true happiness is less about perfect planning and more about learning, adapting, and enjoying the journey. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and keep stumbling into happiness.